When is the last time you listened to a podcast about web development, web design, and small business and didn't fall asleep? Yes, we cover web development, web design, and small business, but like actual human beings with personalities. If you're a beginner, we're not going to talk over your head. It's more like asking your buddy for help. We have guests, we have fun, and let me tell you, these two can get off on a tangent. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to HTML All the Things Podcast. This is Matt Lawrence and Mike Curran.
That's right, everybody. We are back. This is the HTML All Things Podcast. For some reason, I felt like an auctioneer when I did that one. Like that. Whatever they do. I looked up, actually, this is a really random personal story just to kick things off, I guess, but I looked up like what they're saying, and one of the guides that I found, or actually I should say a few of the guides I found, is like you need to like find a word or like a phrase that you say repeatedly, and one of the ones is dollar now, dollar now. So you'll be like $10 now, dollar now. But like what's weird is they're saying it so fast, and I don't think they're saying dollar now. So is it like if I mean, this is a ridiculous fear, but if I went out there to be an auctioneer one day and I was doing the dollar now thing, would they be like, man, this guy is clearly an amateur? Like he went, this is like the my first auction guide of like the auctioneer's thing. It's like, this guy doesn't know the proper like auctioneer yodel or call. But anyway, that's weird, but that's something that crossed my mind, and also I looked up and wasted time doing. Anyway, that's not what this episode is about. This episode is about a week in the life of a developer at a tech startup. So Mike's going to be describing his day. He's going to be talking about, because he works for a company named Cyprin. So he's going to be discussing that tech startup. He's going to be discussing his role and all kinds of different things like that. So if this sounds interesting to you, do you want to support the show, you can go and check us out on that Patreon, leave a review, rating on your podcast app, join us in our Discord server, or share this with your friends. And remember, you can get up to 20% off your Scrimba subscription if you want to learn with their interactive media player code editor. You can do so with our link, and it is an affiliate link, just to let you know, scrimba.com/links/HTML, all the things. All the details will be in the show notes on HTMLallthethings.com. So Mike, why don't you give us a rundown on your day-to-day life as a developer?
Yeah, absolutely. I think one thing I want to do with these kinds of episodes, and I think we've had a few similar episodes in the past, but overall, what I want to do with these episodes is normalize what day-to-day life is like in different work settings, right? Because I think for people that are just getting into the industry, or people that are looking to change jobs, or people that are just in the industry and don't know what other people's lives are like, it's kind of cool to listen to someone talking about their day and understand that, like, hey, I get the same thing as them, or this is completely different from from how I work. And the other thing is, like, if you listen to anything that I say here and you disagree with something, or you have a better way to do it, or you guys do it completely differently, right? You can definitely reach out at HTML Everything on X and let me know, because I'm always on there checking my DMs to see if people want to reach out and talk about their day-to-day life at whatever tech startups they're at, or tech jobs, or FANG jobs, or whatever. Or if they're just if you're just breaking into the industry and you want to ask a question, more specific question about something I talked about today, that's another reason to reach out as well. But yeah, so I think to just jump right in, I want to kind of define what a tech startup is really. It's a smaller organization. A lot of tech startups obviously deal with a tech adjacent thing. It's not going to be like a banking startup. Like, it's not going to be a bank or anything like that. It's not going to be an established, 1,000 to 2,000 person firm. It's not going to be a law firm. It's not going to be some sort of like a adjacent business. This is going to be very much tech related. They're trying to solve a specific problem in the tech space, and they've created an entire company around it, hired a bunch of people to help them solve it. And usually the company ranges between anywhere like, a couple people to maybe just under 100, right? Like that, I think that's the general definition of a tech startup. And then you get into like a medium-sized company after that.
Well, I'd like to like just jump in, because like, just to kind of clarify if you are hired on a team that is like for like a law firm or something like that, typically you are a department within the IT department, or you're a team within the IT department. Usually they'll loop you into like, oh, you're on the tech side of things, you're in IT. And then if something goes wrong with the website, they might just like open a ticket, and then like someone who is handling the ticket allocation would then assign it to the appropriate team, which in this particular case would be you as the web developer. So that's where it's a little bit different. Whereas like the law firm is trying to like, solve solve cases or whatever they're doing, dealing with people suing each other or whatever, dealing with family matters, all those legal things. In like a tech company would be like, an example would be like, we're starting like a new app.
That's exactly it. So the team atmosphere, or like the different kind of roles in a tech startup, are different from, like, again, a law firm, right? So I wanted to kind of break those down as well. A typical tech startup will have obviously the development team, and again, another kind of pretty significant differentiating factor between like what Matt was saying with a department, rather than like you are a department of developers, but a lot of times the developers are almost like the main focus or like a big portion of a tech startup, because you're trying to build something in the tech space or to service the tech space. So you need the developers front and center a lot of times. They're very much involved in a lot of the day-to-day life of that entire organization, of the entire startup. Whereas, again, in a more traditional company, the developers are almost like a service role where they just help out the actual main goal of the company. In this particular case, it's kind of similar, but the main goal of the company is very much tied to the developers. So the developers are there. That's a big, big portion. The other part of the company that's really important, especially in the early stages, is like a sales team. You'll see a lot of companies have sales teams, and these people are the ones that usually sell the product or help sell the product of whatever the tech company is working on. You obviously have marketing a lot of times in different sizes, depending on what kind of company you are. You'll have maybe HR. The HR is actually a pretty big question mark, depending on the size of a startup. A lot of companies have started to use like Deal or something like that, like essentially a SaaS that becomes your HR, where you just put in all your documentation into there and you can talk to their AI about HR related things.
Oh,
like,
what the hell?
yeah, like a lot of tech startups don't have a dedicated HR. They'll either have an outsourced HR firm where, one firm services like 100 different companies essentially. So you don't have a dedicated HR person, or you have literally a piece of software as your HR. I've had.
Well, I figured like an agency, like a something you would, or an agency you would hire, or even like you would just hire one person. So your HR department is just like, one random person that you've hired. But I never would have thought to hand it to an AI, which is crazy.
Yeah, I mean, like the AI is just a part of that software SaaS. Like it's the SaaS itself is more like what HR does, which is like a little bit of onboarding, some, what's the actual organization's rules, like, documentation and stuff like that. So it handles that part of it. The AI, I think, is brought in to like not mediate or anything like that, but just like question the rules of a company. So if like you're like unsure of, hey, can I post this tweet or can I post this thing on X? Some of these AIs can like look at the company's guidelines and determine if you can post that on X. So they don't replace an HR person really, but they can replace some of the functionality of an HR. And like, again, some tech startups, or quite a few tech startups that I know of, don't have a dedicated HR. So
I had this horrible like mental image of like the iRobot robot, where like, when it like looks over like the meme and says no, it'd be like you and I having an HR, like we had an argument or something, and now we have like an HR, like someone has to come in there from HR to mediate, and it's an AI in this particular case, and they're like, you're wrong, Matt, you're just wrong. And it's like, oh, I'm being told by a machine, like this feels really, not only do I feel bad because apparently I'm wrong, but a machine's telling me, like it's a little dystopian.
Is it dystopian? Like so you trust a random human without any context versus...
Not that I trust a random human more than I am more familiar with that. So it might be a comfort level thing.
Sure. Yeah, I could see that. It's just like, no offense to the HR people out there. I'm sure there's plenty of good HR out there. As an employee, I've never really gotten any benefit from an HR. I'm sure the HR is great for a company or something like that, like for the actual corporation. And I think that's their purpose, even though that they're very much like employee facing people, and their whole they tell you their whole purpose is to make your life easier. I don't think that that's really their main purpose. So like, for me, like this whole like no HR thing is actually fine. Like I don't give a crap if I have any questions. Usually the difference with a tech startup, again, is management and leadership is a lot more approachable. Right? Like, so you can usually go to the CEO and be like, I have this issue, and the CEO will solve it. Or if you have like a manager, you can go to the manager and usually they will solve it. Versus like the extra layer of an HR team, that would then go to your manager and complain that you're complaining about something. And then that middle step almost seems like it leaves a worse taste in, like, the telephone game mouth, right? Like, if I complain about someone without talking to my manager about it, and the HR people are the ones that are contacting the manager, which is what happens in this situation, right? Like, the HR is not going to protect you. They're going to try to protect the company. So, like, they're going to talk to your manager to try to mitigate the situation. Then the manager would feel like they've been overstepped, or there's weird communication going on. And so, like, that leaves a bad taste in their mouths over the employee that complained about something. So, like, it's a weird system at its level that it is right now in the HR. So removing that and allowing a more direct line of communication, in my opinion, is a better way to handle it. Now, it can lead to worse things, sure, like managers can be assholes, but in the reality, like, they're going to be assholes regardless. Anyway, from the HR side, yeah, that's a very typical thing. You're going to have either a service as an HR, like, company that handles HR for many companies, or no HR at all.
Or HR as an iRobot.
Sure, or HR as an iRobot, absolutely. And then you might have other parts of the business, like more standard parts, like administrative assistants and stuff like that. But overall, your business is going to be very much horizontal a lot of times. Like, in a traditional org, it's a lot of like pyramids, like a bunch of managers with people under them, different departments with managers, cross team managers. It's much more horizontal, which is good and bad in different scenarios. Like, you have less management, so you're required to be your own manager a lot of times, right? So I'm just trying to give an idea of what a tech startup is. I've been in quite a few at this point, so that's been my experience. And as I'm going to be talking about in my perspective right now, my role at the current tech startup, which is Cypherin, I'm the head of engineering, so I'm in more of a leadership management position there. I'll be talking both from a management position, leadership position, talk about day-to-day life, and as a IC, like a regular developer, because I was both at this company. So I have understanding and I have experience in both scenarios, right? So I'll be talking about both. I'll be trying to focus more on the developer side of things, talking about the developer side, but I'll mention a little bit about the leadership, because I think it is an important aspect for people to consider if they ever want to go that route. And I don't think it's for everyone, right? Like, it's definitely a lot of shortcomings to it, but especially for people like to know, like, oh, I don't want to do that. I think that's a great thing to know early on in your career. Or if people really want to do it, then this will be good too. So with that, I think we can jump directly into what day-to-day life is like at a company like this. So I'm going to be talking about multiple different types of days, right? In a week, I'll have many different types of days depending on what kind of week it is. But I'm going to kind of outline each one. So the first one I'm going to start with is actually a normal day. So these can be Mondays, Tuesdays, it can be any day of the week, but this is a normal, typical day, right? For me at a startup company. About 1 to 3 meetings, not bunched together well. This is kind of like a red flag a little bit sometimes, where you have one meeting here, one meeting at like 9 a.m., one meeting at like 11:30, one meeting at like 1 or something like that. That's a typical day. Like, sometimes it's only 1 or 2 meetings, which is great, but it's not a well-planned day a lot of times, which kind of sucks in a certain way, because you're only able to do so much in between those meetings. So a lot of your day revolves around those meetings. So between those meetings, what I try to do is making sure that statuses of projects are on track, making sure that there's nothing that's blocking from my end, right? Like, there's no questions towards me. I'm not doing any sort of deep work between those meetings. And that's a really key component. And when you're managing people, what you want to do is try to avoid having too many of these days for people, because that means that they're not able to do work as well. When you realize that for yourself, you realize that for everyone else. It's kind of a really cool, or a really good understanding of what their life is like and what you need to do to avoid it, right? If you make it so that every day for your developers, they have meetings split between, half their day, then that means they're probably not getting a lot of work done between those meetings, realistically. Like, they'll get spun up a little bit here, spun up a little bit there, and then they'll have to context switch to the meeting, context switch back. That all takes a ton of time. So,
well, how would you navigate that if they have to talk to multiple departments? Because, like, we've already talked about multiple departments, of course. It's like, you can kind of probably, what'd you say, I guess, a closed environment as a development team. if we consider that team a closed environment, you can kind of like figure out the schedule for everybody and figure out, the best times for meetings and things. But then the other closed environments, meaning the other departments, are going to be doing the same thing. So if they have to jump on a meeting together, how do you manage that? Like, I guess at a tech startup, actually, I guess when I, kind of speaking aloud, it's like, or thinking aloud, it would be easier because obviously it's like maybe the QA department's 2 people. It's not like QA, you have to go through Bill, who's the VP, who's that, all this like kind of like a chain and a hierarchy of people. It'd be less that, but I could still see the departments kind of clashing a bit, especially when you're still a tech startup, if there's like 6 to 10 people in each department.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and the way we solve it is we have a sync day. So that's actually the next day that I was going to talk about. But essentially, 1 day a week is dedicated to these cross-departmental sync meetings. And what that means is that, especially for me, I have meetings pretty much for 60 to 70% of the day, where every single product team meets. I'm part of every single product as the head of engineering to make sure that the communication is flowing well. And that product team is the PM, so the product manager or the project manager, a QA, the design, and the engineer on the product. And so that singular day of meetings that I have all packed together, and a lot of times engineers will actually be on multiple of them, depending on how cross-team their products are. So we'll pack them together super tight so that you're essentially going from meeting to meeting to meeting to meeting for the most part. You don't have too much time between them. And it's 1 day, you get them all over with. And then the next half of most of the engineer's day, they can still get to work and stuff like that. For me, it's a little bit different where I end the meeting day and I only have like 2 or 3 hours left of my entire day. So usually that time is spent on updating my documents with all the information that I got from those meetings, making sure that the communication that needs, like a lot of to-dos come out of those meetings for me, like to unblock people. I get that done and stuff like that. So I don't do a lot of programming on those days, but I only keep it to essentially 1 day then, right? So that mitigates the factor that I was talking about in the normal day, where you have those meetings split up and you're not able to get deep work. If you continually have constant need for cross-team or cross like department communication, that's actually a pretty big red flag that you need to figure out a different way to communicate. And a lot of that, it comes back to like, hey, can we just leave this as status updates on a linear ticket or like a Jira ticket? Can you just, prompt me in Slack and I'll check it when I'm done with my deep work? You need to manage that, the ability for people to be able to communicate effectively, but also the ability for people not to get pulled away from whatever they're working on. Otherwise, you're going to have a mess of engineers not doing engineering and just doing communicating. And that's a lot of times in startups or in any company, a lot of times that is one of the biggest and hardest issues to solve.
Well, it's going to also like grind your productivity to a halt too, because
Yeah.
you're going to be progressing so slowly. Like it wouldn't even be all that crazy for an engineer to quite literally like get basically nothing but like reviewing documents done in a day. Cause it's like, well, I have a meeting in an hour. I better like familiarize myself with this. And then, they spin up in that, they read it out or whatever. And then it's like, okay, like now on to the meeting, but now they've spun up in something else completely. And it's like, well, I don't even know how much I can retain from both the meeting and my read up. Cause it's just, we're slinging information back and forth. And we're not like putting anything down on the page, like not literally the page, but I guess in the code base, we're not putting anything down in that code base. We're just sort of like back and forth. It's almost like maybe you are doing like idea concepting, I suppose, but even if you're not, it's sort of like that phase, like when everyone kind of gets excited over a new idea or a new business, it's like everyone's firing off ideas and it's like really kind of fun to have those conversations. But like that would get exhausting. That type of conversation, that type of like broken conversation, I guess, would get exhausting, I'd imagine, over and over again. Like every day it would be like, man, like we're just kind of firing things across the table here. And like the code base grew by 50 lines this week.
Absolutely. And early on in a startup's phase, those conversations are awesome because you're ideating, you're figuring out the direction, you're trying new things. As the startup grows from like 5 employees to 30 employees, those conversations, like you said, get exhausting. Because usually what happens is someone pitches an idea that's maybe been pitched 5 or 6 times before in a random Slack channel or in public or whatever. And then people have to come in and spend time explaining why that idea won't work and stuff like that. And like, I think it's good. Like, it's always good to have a way to pitch your ideas, right? But what I try to kind of get people to understand is you don't have to be checking non-essential Slack channels all the time. Because if you're, again, trying to do some deep work and something comes up in like a feature request channel and you're always trying to get on that as an engineer, it's going to constantly derail you. So we have separate channels that are less important where people can just kind of mute them and just check them whenever they want for that kind of stuff. And that usually helps out because it's good. It's important to keep your Slack on even when you're deep working because stuff can go down, but you should only have to worry about like a few different avenues of communication at that point. If something comes outside of those avenues, it's not urgent. You're good to go. You don't need to worry about it.
Well, I mean, just like talking personally, like there's a prime example, and I'm actually kind of the instigator in this particular case, although I need to, is like a lot of the time I'll be working as a contractor, building someone's website for them. And then what'll end up happening is I'll need some sort of like specific graphic, or I'll need a specific, usually it's like a visual thing from the graphic team, like the art team, whatever. And so I'll, kind of sometimes even constantly, like 2-3 times a day, I'll have to like ask like, hey, we're putting in, all these graphics and all these logos and all this. And I'll only, like, it's not even due to lack of planning, because it sounds like I'm having like a lack of planning, right? Where it's like, I didn't like check all the assets. It's like, no, if you're dealing with 300 to 400 assets, I mean, putting them in and it looks a little bit blurry, it's like technically it's there, but I need a better one from the art team, and I never would have seen this without doing it. So you kind of have to be that instigator, right? Where I'm like constantly pinging, but hopefully the channel that I'm instructed to ping on is a less important channel, so that I'm not interrupting them like redoing the design system or whatever the heck they're doing that's more important. They'll just like, at the end of the day, or maybe in the morning, they'll be like, okay, like Matt needs a better logo version because it's a little blurry. I'm not blocked. I can just keep going. But it just, like, I could definitely see where like the derailment can happen even just from my own work. Because it's like if the graphic manager or whoever, the designer, if they're constantly derailed by me being like, hey, I actually need another logo. Hey, I actually need to know this exact color code because I can't get it, or whatever, the list goes on. I could see that becoming exhausting for them. And like at the end of the day, like I'm not blocked. I can just keep going. I just kind of like hit a hitch, need help, but I'm just going to keep moving.
Yeah. And that comes back to like implementing proper procedures for requesting updates, requesting features, requesting design assets and stuff like that. We had that exact thing happen that you said, Matt, where people were just requesting design stuff left, right, and center without any sort of organization around it. And yeah, the designers were buried, like fully and utterly buried, because there was no organization around how or who can request those features or like what it needs to go through. Well, as soon as we added like a template for requesting in linear where people have to fill out more information and approvers and stuff like that, it all became, it all evened out. It obviously, you still get requests, you still get urgent requests even, but they're very far and few between. And designers now have the ability to like focus on the actual work that they're doing, and design requests get done in decent amounts of time. So like you, at some point in a startup's life, processes need to start bleeding into your work. My goal usually is to keep the processes as minimal as possible for as long as possible, right? Like as your team, at the less processes you have, the more your team has control over what they do. But as soon as stuff comes up, like what you're saying with the design process or like with design requests, it starts derailing your team. What you need to do is you need to start implementing at the minimal level something that will stop that from happening and let them continue to have as much control over what they're doing as possible, and slowly bring in other processes, other procedures to help rather than to mitigate. And I think what a big mistake that I've seen made is you approach some sort of, point in a company like 30 people, and all of a sudden you get like a scrum master to come in, or a product manager that's like super anal about something. And they start implementing all of the systems that they're familiar with in one sweep. Right. And that halts everything. And I've seen that happen where it's like, oh, you didn't estimate this ticket, so we can't work on it. So let's spend like an hour or two estimating all these tickets, and then let's start working on it. Oh, the estimation was wrong. Let's go back and have a retrospective on why that estimation was wrong, right? And then let's record that estimation. So that's another 3 meetings added onto that engineer's day. And then you're like, oh, well, then another thing and another. Like, as soon as you start implementing an entire system on a group of engineers that's used to working more ad hoc and they have the ownership of a product, you grind them to a point where you're probably going to need a different engineering team. That's the reality. You need an engineering team that's used to that system. You need engineers that are better, more task-oriented people where they're like, give me a task, I'll do it, right? Like more this like ticketing approach. And that's fine, and you can find those engineers. But when you're a startup, and I'm talking strictly at startups, you need to find the balance between allowing your developers or whatever team you're working with to have the autonomy to complete tasks while also giving them enough guidance to complete them correctly. And that balance is super difficult. And I speak from experience, like we've screwed it up over here, we screwed it up over there, but I think what we've done is we've always kept that balance enough where people do feel like they have enough ownership to complete the task and to like feel like they've contributed significantly to a product.
Well, yeah, what you're talking about is basically like you're creating systems and procedures as a response to issues rather than coming in with a template. Like obviously you have to have some form of template at the beginning, like the high level stuff. You're like, okay, this, we're going to use, you have to choose like, you're going to use GitHub or like Bitbucket, for example. Like I think that's a procedure that you bring in before any problems arise. But then obviously as that one issue, like you mentioned, like the graphics, that is an example of like, as a response, you made a procedure rather than that. Because like, I'll tell you this, like a little bit of a really brief personal story is one of my jobs as a co-op. I absolutely had a day where I just filled out tickets. And like, we had like bureaucratic nonsense where it would be like, we can't work on this ticket because Bill isn't in the office and Bill needs to sign off on this and we can't talk to Bill. And it's like, okay, well, let me be clear. Like the work that is being described in the ticket is being done by a third party, and they're not going to stop. Like I can't go to the third party and be like, everybody halt. Bill, who you don't know, is out of the office and can't click a check mark and then submit. So therefore, all work by this contractor must cease. So then it's like, and we would have like meetings and arguments and back and forths and all this because of little things like that. And I would spend literally an entire day pretty well per week, sometimes multiple days per week, filling out tickets in a very specific way. Meanwhile, there was, if you missed a ticket or something, it was always like, oh, it's no big deal. It's like, so why is the ticketing such a big deal?
Yeah, that's exactly it. And like in a larger corporation, that might be somewhat required for transparency, for auditing purposes, for just keeping standards and stuff like that. I can kind of understand it, although I think that they do go overboard and they do stop their top performers from performing their best because of it, right? Like
it's almost like you need another process where you're like, now this is a problem. We need another process to say if someone's on vacation. But it's like, no, we have a process and we're not changing it.
Yeah, exactly. And then people that are sticklers to the rules where they're like, well, I won't work on this ticket unless you assign it like a certain amount of points or something like that. Like there's certain things where like there's like a doc, and then if it's not followed strictly to that doc, the person's just like literally sitting there not working on it. And no matter what, they won't work on it. And that type of mentality doesn't work in a startup environment, period. Like if you're that type of person out there, that you need to have like everything outlined to you to the T, and you're only going to do it if it's directly created into this exact template that was created. And if it's even slightly off because you have a fear of something being wrong, like if you're in that kind of line of thinking, the unfortunate reality is that startups aren't for you, because startups are usually chaos. And you can thrive in that chaos, and some people do, and some people can't. And it's okay. And there's better ways to manage that chaos. And again, that's what I'm talking about with bringing in some of the systems, like bringing in more organization, bringing in more task management, bringing in more talking to linear boards and stuff like that, right? Like bringing in Jira. But at some point in a startup, you need to be the person that like drives the task. If there's things missing, you're the one that goes and gets the information rather than waiting for the project manager to fill it in, right? Like you're out there asking for the information from whoever you need to ask it to be able to complete the ticket or complete the project or whatever. You can't rely on others to get it for you, because again, in a startup, there's just not enough hands. There's not enough people to be assigned to like be a scrum master. There's not enough, like the project manager is managing like 6 projects. Like it's just not reality to expect exact coordination between teams without you going out and trying to get that information yourself. So There again, positives and negatives about working in a startup. Some people really like that kind of atmosphere because they again feel like they have a little bit more ownership. They have ability to do the things that they want to do because there's just not enough oversight to be able to oversee them enough, right? But there's also negatives in which like you might get a ticket that says fix button. That might be assigned to you,
That's not
and
good.
there might be like a short description about it in like one of the sync meetings, and then you forget about it, and you're like, I don't remember what this button means. Like I don't remember what fix button means, and what that means is that you need to go out and you need to ask for clarification and get that clarification, and then work on that ticket. Like it's not that hard, but it's also kind of frustrating in a lot of ways too. Like it can get frustrating when there's not enough information given to you to solve a task. But the point is you need to be the one that initiates getting that information.
Well, I was gonna say too is like you're kind of like closer to the work at that point. Like when you're working for an absolutely massive corporation, it's like, okay, well, this is now an unmanageable mess, and it's not actually due to the work, it's due to the amount of people and departments that they've hired and people and like maybe even international where they have multiple offices. And so they need to have that strict like rule set in order to have everybody, this team must deliver this, and then after that this team delivers this based on this, and it has to be very like specific. Whereas like, I mean, if you go to like do like a home improvement project, you don't have like your own like personal permitting office where it's like, I got the permit from the city or the town, and so legally speaking I'm all good, but I'm gonna have my own permit processing thing for my own self. Oh, looks like I'm allowed to take 3 weeks to sign my own permit, so I'm just going to sit around. It's like, no, you don't. Maybe like you don't do that. Like that's crazy talk kind of thing. So it's like you're closer to the work. Like you're the one putting that wall up, putting the paint on, the primer, all that, putting the whatever electrical in or whatever if you're allowed to do that, and you're the one kind of doing it. Whereas like in the more, I guess, rule filled setup, I suppose you could say, you're more of just a cog in the machine, but it's because you have to be just a cog in the machine.
Yep, and that's exactly it. So like it is what it is, and personally, again, I like the chaos. I think it keeps me more entertained and more in it. And I like the fact that, like you said, like you're way more connected to the product that you're building versus just building one little tiny thing that maybe no one will ever see, and actually probably no one will ever see. So again, personal preference thing. And it's important to understand these differences when you're getting into it, because if you're going to get a job at a startup, you need to understand that like it's going to be startup-y a lot of times. Now, moving on to kind of like different days here as well. We've talked about the regular day. Again, meetings are sparse and far between. There's not too many, but that kind of screws up the flow of the day a lot of times. A lot of my purpose on those days is to, again, answer questions, unblock people, making sure that people have the right tasks assigned to them and that there's no like hanging tasks or anything like that. Make sure that cross-departmental stuff is working, right? Like, again, as the head, that's my job. But a lot of times for regular engineers, those days are more focused on the programming, obviously, right? Like you're going to have a couple meetings maybe here and there, but you're going to have way more deep work time as well during those days. So you're able to get quite a bit done. That's versus the meeting sync days, like I was mentioning, where you have potentially 4 hours of meetings. That's a 1-day thing. You get that done, or a half a day thing. And then you're back to either updating stuff from those meetings or working on your programming stuff. The other days that happen and that we have at Cypher, and we have a no meeting Wednesday at Cypher. And on those days we have, again, the rule is no meetings for everyone but sales. Unfortunately, sales can't really have no meeting days because that's their whole job.
I was going to say that is what they do.
Correct. And like, it's not like a super hard rule. I want to be clear on too. Like if a meeting has to bleed into that day, usually we only allow one of like a quick sync or something if it needs to happen. But for the most part, those days are completely clear. You're not expected to be in meetings. So therefore your expectation is, hey, you can do as much deep work as you possibly can those days. And those days for me, that's where I get my harder like programming tasks done. So if I have something where I need to finish a feature or help someone with a feature, I usually put that onto a Wednesday or any other meeting sync days that happen during the week, or like deep work days that happen during the week. And I'll do that heavy programming task where I need like that 4 or 5 hour chunk of time, right, to actually dive deeper into it. And that along with that, I'll do a lot of deep architecture stuff, right? So if I need to re-architect something that we have that's just not working, like a lot of times, again, in startups, you're building something super quickly to get it out. And then all of a sudden, thousands of users are using it. So you need to re-architect it. And that's normal. That's not a mistake. That's literally the process of a startup, the process of product. You want to get something out. You want real people to use it and tell you where it's wrong or where it's slow. And then you want to spend the time fixing the stuff that's important rather than spending a ton of upfront time making sure that everything is working at the most peak efficiency ever, but not releasing anything quickly, right? So it's part of it. Deep architecture, that's done on deep work days. A lot of system design, again, similar to deep architecture. Like if we need to create a whole new database system, like you create a new sink, like we're kind of considering doing an offline first approach for some of our systems recently. That requires a lot of system design. It's not an easy system, but it will make a user experience like super, super like fast and almost like a native application, right? Because it's a local database that does all of the actual syncing with the UI. And then the local database will then sync with the off-site database. So like some sort of database that you have hosted somewhere. And that makes it so that you're literally like, if the internet cuts off, you're still able to use the application for as long as you want. Everything is synced to a local database. And then all that needs to happen is when the internet comes back on, it'll just perform that sync with the offsite database. So there's a lot of thought, like I'm just giving you an example, but that's the kind of stuff that I would need to do on a deep work day to figure out how that system would work, how it would implement into our apps and stuff like that.
Well, the other thing too, I was going to say is like, the kind of like what you were kind of describing is like the build quick and break things mentality. And we do have an episode about that. That's the 80-20 rule episode. It's actually potentially the previous episode to this or a couple back anyway, but like a recent episode. If you want to go check that out, we talk about how like, doing like 20%, like 20% of the development, is like 80% of the success of the app kind of thing. So it's like very closely related to that. So you can kind of check that out if you're interested, because I think it's really related to what Mike just said.
Yeah, absolutely. Like I think it's important to have those kinds of mindsets in place when you're building something. And again, perfectionism is the enemy in a startup, right? If you're trying to make something good, that's one thing. If you're trying to make something perfect, you're just not going to be successful for the most part. Now, there's a lot of, cases to prove the rule, but whatever. But like the reality is that you need to get something out there because whatever you decide on or whatever your assumptions are probably wrong or in some ways wrong. And you need to be able to adapt to those assumptions. And that's the point of this, right? Like that's the point of these cycles. That's the point of releasing something, iterating on it, making it better, getting something really good up once it's like reaching 1.0 levels or something like that.
Yeah, like, I'll give an example of that. Is like a startup is constantly building quickly, of course, like you're saying, and they're literally sometimes like inventing new things or they're creating things for the very first time, like spinning up a new section of their app, a new feature, or another totally new app. However, there are times where it's like, hey, we have like this old website that, absolutely is like super, super sensitive to any sort of changes, but they need a small change. It's not an emergency, but they do need it. It's like that would be something where you would do it very slowly, even if it's a small change that would only normally take maybe 10 minutes. You may take an hour and a half because you're going to be a perfectionist there. You don't want to take this thing down. It's in production. For whatever reason, we can't stage it or whatever. And it's just sort of like we need a slow, methodical, like perfectionist mindset on this. But like, obviously building new products, building new apps, all that kind of thing from a startup perspective doesn't fall under that same umbrella. But there are times in which like absolutely you don't want to take down. I'll give a prime example is like we've worked on super old Joomla websites. And let me tell you right now, those things go down. I don't know how to fix them. And it would take me a long time to fix them. So doing a real slow, methodical process to get those things to like, change a date that's on the site or something like that, or something really, little silly thing that needs to be changed. Doing it the slow perfectionist way is the way to do that.
Yeah, that's very, very true. Once you get to a certain stage, sometimes you need to slow down like a lot. As soon as your deployments start affecting like thousands of users, like, if you deploy something and it stops 1,000 of users from using it, that's when you really have to start like thinking about, okay, maybe we shouldn't break things. Like maybe we shouldn't release and break things. And that's something you'll learn as you go. Your first version is never going to be that. Let me be clear. That's the thing. Is like you're going to release that first version. You might get an influx of people looking at it because they're interested in it, but usually you're going to have a very slow trickle effect of like, okay, a bunch of people use it. Some people liked it. Here's the feedback that you get. Then you can iterate on it quickly before you get to the stage of like, oh, there's thousands of people using this every second. And if I release a bad version of this, you need to make sure that you have a way to go back to a better version, or you need to make sure that you don't affect as many people as possible. You release it in like feature flags and stuff like that. There's plenty of ways to do that. That's probably a whole episode that we'll have coming up, is like the feature release process to make sure that you don't have bad user experience for like your entire audience, right? Like that's something you really, really need to avoid when you start to become more successful. That's about it for deep work days. Again, they're pretty simple. A lot of times they're days that most developers look forward to because you finally get to do the work that you're paid to do, which is work, which is developing, and usually pretty satisfying. The next day that I want to talk about here is deployment days. So we have kind of Tuesday, Thursday deployment schedule. Not every Tuesday, Thursday, but if we do deployments, they're on those days to make sure that we don't have to deploy on Fridays and stuff like that. And during those days, it's different for everyone. So the person that's leading the deployment, it's not always going to be like a lead engineer or anything like that. It's going to be probably the person that has worked on that feature, the main feature of that deployment. Okay, so that developer will have a very different day from a random other developer that had nothing to put into that deployment, right? So for the developer that is leading the deployment, you're going to have many things to go through. Things like pre-deployment smoke testing, right? Like you're going to be checking on staging environments that everything was working as it was yesterday, right? Like you've already done all your QA, the deployment's been approved. So the assumption is it's working, but before
it's gone gold effectively.
Correct. Yeah, correct. But before you deploy, you still want to just do a sanity check. Like, okay, it's working yesterday, it's working today, good to go. Then you go through the deployment checklist. One of the items on the checklist is the smoke test, but the other stuff could be like making sure that people are notified, making sure that you have a backup, making sure that you're doing it at the right time, etc. Like there's a bunch of stuff that every deployment can be a little bit different on. Like some deployments need extra steps, some deployments need less steps. Like you just have to follow the checklist that whatever you're provided, or create a checklist for a deployment. If you're the one that has to do the deployment, I highly recommend using some sort of way to make sure that you're deploying things consistently. Then you're going to probably kick off a deployment. For us, that's done by just merging a pull request into a main branch. So you merge like from dev to main, and that will kick off automatically all deployments. Could be different for every company. Then while the deployment's going on, you keep an eye on Vercel dashboard. Again, we're on Vercel. We do have some services now on a dedicated server with a Coolify dashboard on top of it, which monitors our deployments. So we do keep an eye on that as well if they're affected. So you keep an eye on your dashboards, making sure the deployment goes smoothly. If something stops, you redeploy, you stop the deployment. One of the things in the checklist is to make sure that you have a way to revert. And this is really important in a deployment day because things will go wrong. I'm not saying things can't go wrong. Things will go wrong. Like maybe not today, maybe not the next day, but someday, at some point, they will for sure 100% go wrong. So you need to make sure that you have a backup plan. If you're deploying like YOLO or whatever, like just get this in, that could have a potential to be like a job-ending move for you. Because again, depending on the size of your startup, depending on how many users you affect, if you can't revert a bad deployment and it stops the ability for your users to use your app, that could be a reputational hit that the startup might not be able to recover from. Like
you lose money, like at that
you lose
point,
money
like,
immediately, you
seriously.
lose trust immediately, your people start complaining about it on social media. It becomes a snowball effect. Depending on the state of your startup, it could be really, really bad. So you have to have a way to go back, right? You have to have a trained and true way to go back. If you don't, then you need to stop a deployment, you need to reschedule a deployment, and you need to get a way to revert. So again, that's just to say that deploying is a very important aspect of this. If you have a way to go back, it becomes a lot less stressful. And this just becomes a regular process, because the worst case scenario, you just revert, and 2 seconds later, or like 2 minutes later, everything goes back to normal. You fix everything, you're coming back. That's not a big deal. People make mistakes. As long as you can revert those mistakes, that's the important part. With that, you're going to have the deployment go through. Time-wise, it can take anywhere between 15 to 25 minutes, depending on what you're deploying. For us, I want to say specifically. And once the deployment is done, you'll want to start post-deployment monitoring. And what that entails, we have a lot of logging set up that'll automatically send logs, like error logs, to our Slack. So we have a bunch of channels in our Slack for different aspects of our application. Just monitoring those channels, making sure that nothing is weird, looking at the usage graphs on the servers to make sure that there's no like weird spikes from like a random infinite loop somewhere that can happen, right? Like just doing your basic monitoring that everything is going as usual. And then also just keeping an eye on Discord. We have a Discord, a support Discord, where people can post their issues. As long as there's nothing like going crazy there, you're good, right? Like the post deployment is going well. And this process as a whole that I just described can be quick, can be like 1 or 2 hours. But if it's a big enough deployment and if stuff goes wrong, it can easily be a full day, 8-hour thing. Like we've had that happen a few times, right? So for the engineer that's actually doing the deployments, they are usually not expected to get much work done that day, if any. Usually their job is to make sure that the deployment goes smoothly, bring in anyone that they need when they need to. Like maybe you need a couple people to be monitoring deployment. If the deployment's big enough and the entire team will hop on a call and do the deployment together, you need to figure that out before you start the deployment and then go through with the checklist and get the deployment done. A lot of times deployments are small enough where it's just the engineer and it can be done in a span of 1 or 2 hours. Like that's a very common thing. Very rarely do we get to the point where we need to bring in the entire team to do a deployment. But if an entire system changes, totally have to do that. For myself personally, I don't do a lot of like personal deployments anymore. I used to a lot, but now the team does them. I will keep an eye on every deployment though to make sure that I can jump in, start a war room, start helping mitigation and stuff like that if stuff comes up. And that's really it. Those are the typical days, the typical weekly days, right? Like that's how your days are going to go depending on what day of the week it is, depending on what kind of schedule you have out there. But it's fairly straightforward. A lot of times developers will be given a lot of time to develop. That's the goal, right? Like as a manager, you have less time. That's okay. I still try to get in a significant amount of hours a week, but it's not going to happen every week, and that's fine. But as a developer, you should have a significant portion of every day to actually do the development part. And that's, again, for the management to figure out how to do that.
Well, because I was going to say, like, it's like as a part of the administration team, like someone's got to take the hit of like, you're no longer like you're taking the administrative hit of the meetings and other things while you're kind of shielding the other engineers from having to like show up to every single meeting and stuff. Like it's an inevitability because you need to know, like, if the brass say, you know what, like we want to change directions and we don't want this thing, built anymore. It's like, you got to like figure out how to like tell the team that, or like pass on the thoughts, right? Where it's like, let's actually make it like this instead of like this. And it's like, okay, how do I tell the team that? It can't just be like an all hands every single time, because then every single developer is going to be like, what's happening? Like, do I keep doing my job? Do I keep doing my tickets? Like, what's going on? And then it's going to be chaos across the entire team, I would imagine.
That is exactly it. Someone needs to do it. The good news is at a startup, like in a bigger company, a head of engineering or like an engineering manager wouldn't be doing any coding at all. That is the reality. Right. Like you would be doing zero coding. You would just be an engineering manager. You would just be talking to cross teams. You would just be laying out plans. That's all that engineering manager will do at a larger company. At a startup,
might not even be a technical person.
Yeah, absolutely. You could just be literally a manager, and that I've seen that before. Or I've seen like someone that was a technical person like 15 years ago as a manager without any knowledge of the technical stuff, like at different levels. But that's a very, very normal thing at a larger company. At a small startup, still, an engineering manager can still dive into the code a little bit, right? Like, and depending on the size of the startup, depending on how it is, every startup is very different. So I'm fortunate to be in that position where I could still dive into the code for anywhere between like 50%, maybe like 40% of the week, which is cool. But the reality is like it's kind of shrinking as the team grows. So you need to figure out that proportion as you grow as well.
Yeah, because you're still in startup mode. You're still bumping up against the idea like a small business where you're wearing multiple hats, whereas like that'll obviously start to like slowly go away, because it's like we need to lean on Mike for his like engineering admin, we need to lean on Bill for his like development, we need to lean on like Jill for her HR or like whatever. You need to like lean on each of these individual skills because it'll eventually monopolize all of your time.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, being able to like properly divide up the efforts between the teams is super, super key. And figuring out where everyone's like best property is, because every developer is different too. Even if it's just a development team, some people just might be better at doing certain kind of tasks, figuring that out. And then the tough thing is also not just like feeding them only those tasks. You need to have diversity between the team. Like if you find out, oh, this guy's really good at buttons, random example, not realistic, but like this guy's super good at buttons, right? And you only give them buttons for the rest of their like the rest of the time, they're probably going to leave because they're just not going to want to do buttons all the time, even if they are really good at it. So you need to make sure that people have enough of a challenge to stick around and enough like, growth opportunity. And that also comes through a little bit of one-on-ones with people. So like I'll do something I didn't mention that I should have mentioned is during the sync days, I'll sometimes have my one-on-ones with everyone where I could just pack those in between meetings or after meetings and stuff like that. And I'll talk to every engineer once a month, once every 2 weeks, depending on what's going on, just to make sure that we're on the same page kind of thing. I try to keep them fairly informal and as infrequent as I can, but I've been learning that as the team grows, it's just it's become kind of a requirement to make sure that everyone is treated fairly and everyone has just a way to voice their concerns and stuff like that.
Oh, it makes sense. Because, like, I mean, you're going to, if someone is actually really good at something that's, a little more advanced in buttons, you're probably going to lean on them for that. But, like, they could feel the same way where they're like, man, all I'm doing is, like, these mega menus and nav bars, which can get pretty complex. But at the same time, it's like, I'm just the mega menu guy. Like, what the heck's going on here? Like, why am I just doing mega menus? And, like, that kind of sucks, of course. Like, you don't want to just, like, pigeonhole somebody like that necessarily. Unless it is, like, something's, again, like, if you start getting bigger, you may become, like, this is my nav bar guy. Hopefully not, but
yeah, like that's totally possible if you get pigeonholed into something and you're really good at it. It's something that happens to people. But before we end the episode, I do want to talk like a few things that can come up during the day that can completely derail your days. So like every day is going to be different in some way, shape, or form. But what can happen is during a day, you can have a challenge that comes up that will have to completely change that day's dynamic, right? And so stuff that can come up are stuff like outages, obviously, like you notice your service monitoring peaking, something happened, and that all of a sudden makes almost all the engineers have to go on a war room, like on a call, essentially, try to fix that. That could completely change up the day, like whatever day it is, deep work day, meeting day, like sync day, all that stuff gets canceled and you jump on whatever comes up, right? Hopefully not super common, but something you have to adapt to, something you have to be okay with. DDoS attacks, similar thing that can happen. Honestly, it's happened to us right now. It kind of sucks, but it's one of those things where you just have to react to it. Thankfully, systems are in place to stop them these days. It's not super hard to mitigate. It's just annoying that you just have to deal with it. They can happen. You can have internal employee conflicts. Nothing too crazy can happen, but someone can say something offensive or something can say something accidentally offensive because right now we're asynchronous. So there's not a lot of like personality that can come through text. So if you're trying to joke with someone, something can happen. Anyway, you might have to mitigate that. That could derail someone's day, can derail my day for sure. Deployments, like I said, totally change the day. It's a whole different day for people, different roles in the deployment. And the last thing here is on call. So at least at our startup right now, like we don't have like a strict on-call schedule in the sense of like after your normal work day, there's someone that's on call after you or something like that. We have a very diverse time zone engineering team. So during the week, we're almost covered on every single time frame as an engineering team where people work on different times. So it makes it a little bit easier. During weekends, though, that's where we do have an on-call schedule. We just rotate out between all the engineers, and once every 6 or 7 weeks or so, you'll be on call for the weekend. What that entails is you just have to be available and keeping an eye on like your Slack notifications, making sure that the monitoring is okay. If anything happens, you either try to solve it, triage to the right person. So like we have a red phone thing where if you can't solve it and you can't mitigate, right? Like you can't make it so that, reverting like if it's a bad deployment, reverting a deployment or making it so that whatever is broken can't be fixed or can't be like stopped or whatever, then you will be in charge of actually calling the person that can, right? So there's a red phone thing and that happens. So we've never had to use it, knock on wood. Most of the time, again, everything can be mitigated and it hasn't been an issue, but it's important to have that kind of structure in place just in case that happens, right?
I was gonna say don't say that out loud.
Yeah, I know. Bad to
Yeah,
say.
we never had to use this absolutely like disastrous thing that we have in place just in case. Meanwhile, the red phone starts ringing. It's like,
yeah, right now, yeah. Well, to be clear, my red phone has rung, but no one else has.
Okay.
Yeah.
Wait, as a developer or
As a
like,
manager?
as a manager,
Yeah,
okay.
it's different. Oh, but yeah, that's it. That's all I got for a day in the life of a developer at a tech startup. Hopefully this was interesting to you in the sense that like, hey, this is what your life could be like if you go to a tech startup. Or if you are a tech startup and it's completely different, please let me know. At HTML Everything on X, would love to hear your experience. If I get enough replies, maybe we can have like a big blog post about everyone's different days and create a little bit of can even create like an app where people can outline their own days and have an interesting like archive of everyone's different structure of days as a tech startup. I don't know. I'm just talking out loud, filling the time for Matt to get the Patreon doc ready and open.
Oh, I'm ready this week.
Let's go.
I'm freaking ready.
Thank you, Matt. Yeah, let it go.
Yeah, let's run the old conclusion, I guess, then. So I am ready with this Patreon document. So remember that if you want to become one of these patrons, or there's other tiers as well, or maybe one other tier, remember that we are on Patreon. That's patreon.com/HTML, all the things. And many thanks to our $3 tiered patrons. Tim from the Web Hacker on thewebhacker.com, Jason from Geek Life Radio via geekliferadio.com, Garrett Segal, Level Up Financial Planning via www.levelupfinancialplanning.com, Magnus from YesWeb via yesweb.se, Syntaxify from the HTML All the Things Discord server, and Stacy Mossler from the website swoonworthydesigns.com. And if you want to support the show and also support yourself and support your learning journey, you can go ahead and do that. You can do so via Scrimba. We have an up to 20% off up to 20% off your subscription if you use our affiliate link. Again, that affiliate link will be in the show description as well as in the show notes on htmlallthethings.com. And just verbally here, scrimba.com/links/html all the things. Again, all the details will be in the show notes. And I'd like to give a shout out to Michael LaRocca, a contributing author on htmlallthethings.com. Michael is the author of Self-Taught, the X Generation blog at selftaughttxg.com. Feel free to leave a comment or a review of the platform that you are listening to this on, and this outro will sign us off.
You've been listening to HTML All the Things podcast. Web development, web design, and small business. We hope you've gotten some useful and practical information from this show. And we hope you appreciate that we talk to you like human beings. And we hope you had some fun. We'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hit us up on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and Patreon at HTML All the Things. And on Twitter at HTML Everything. Until next time, this is HTML All the Things, signing off.